Good evening and welcome to the Amnesty International Northern Ireland Annual Lecture 2024. We are delighted to welcome Francesca Albanese, one of the most important voices of our time, to deliver this year's Amnesty Lecture. She was appointed the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory by the Human Rights Council in 2022. The Special Rapporteur is an independent expert whose mission is to assess the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, report publicly about it, and work with governments, civil society, and others. Since she took up her mandate, Ms. Albanese has produced a number of reports. Her most recent, Genocide as Colonial Erasure, examines the horrors currently unfolding right across the occupied Palestinian territory. We welcome the Special Rapporteur to deliver this year's Amnesty International ANI Annual Lecture. Francesca Albanese, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone, colleagues and friends. It is an honor for me to be invited to give the 2024 Amnesty International Northern Ireland Annual Lecture. I want to thank all those in Amnesty who made this event possible, and first and foremost, Patrick Corrigan. I want to start by saying that, by acknowledging that this is a moment of darkness and despair, no doubt about that. But in moments like that, like in moments of deep pain, it is important that we create opportunities like this to come together, to be inspired into strength and into hope that a more just and humane future is possible. Without hope, we are lost, writes Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. And hope is being able to see that there is light in the darkness, used to say Desmond Tutu. And hope is a discipline, as abolitionist organizer Mariame Kaba says. Indeed, each and every one of us must maintain the hope and recognize that we are part of an interconnected struggle, because the crisis in Palestine, marked by an ongoing genocide, has become a global crisis. Many, including in our countries, in Europe, in the UK, are facing reprisals for exercising their right to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Suspended from universities, being students or professors, fired from their jobs and subjected to smears, doxing or bullying by the sycophants that populate pro-Israel support groups everywhere. And yet, we must continue, because even if we do not see it, every little action we take makes a difference to Palestine, and we must sustain and redouble our efforts toward ending genocide, ending occupation, and ending apartheid. The situation in Palestine today is harrowing. In a year that I've been forced to become a chronicler of genocide, I have realized that denialism and obscurantism have enveloped the facts that which have enveloped the facts that constitute this current human-made catastrophe are unprecedented in magnitude, pervasiveness, and dangerousness. And neither are coincidental. But allow me to first put the situation of Palestine as it is today, of the Palestinians living under occupation squarely in our minds. In the past 14 months, Israel has destroyed Gaza. Its constant bombing, sniper, and artillery fire have spared nothing and no one. Warfare has shown its most ruthless face: large-scale, indiscriminate bombings, the use of artificial intelligence, selected targeting systems, the persistent surveillance of unmanned drones overhead, automatic snipers firing people as they shop in markets, collect water, or seek medical help, or even sleep in their tents. Soldiers bunker down in tanks, attacking unarmed civilians. This has been 14 months in Gaza. Burned alive, let to die agonizingly slow deaths under the rubble. whole generations of families crowded in homes that are raised in single instants. Hospitals and refugee camps, entire neighborhoods turned into cemeteries full of children, scholars, doctors, nurses, persons with disabilities, once used to call Gaza their home. This is a genocide of the unhuman, though. The technology designed to take the humanity out of the act of killing, maiming, and destroying. The person who dies, crushed under a tank, killed by a drone, chased into a building, or trying to cross hazardous streets, crushed into smithereens by bunker bombs launched by military jets, traversing the sky from sunset to dawn, is one unseen by their killers. All the more when the killer, as is the case for far too many children, is an automated quadcopter. Schools, universities, churches, hospitals, mosques, bakeries, agricultural land, water pipes, any means of survival in Gaza has been targeted, including the aid workers' infrastructure needed for the provision of life-saving assistance. Palestinian journalists, those trying to capture the story of their own people suffering, have not been spared. 183 so far have been assassinated in Gaza. In Gaza, what is it today? It's a wasteland of rubble and human remains where the Palestinians are holding on to what remains of their lives through the most extreme deprivation and through the harsh cold of winter once again. This apocalyptic scenario is not the unfathomable consequence of a military operation. It is all happening by design. The Israeli government has made it clear the Palestinians have to be starved. The Amalek have to be destroyed. And it is the individual horrors that tell a sadistic tale of genocide against a people as such. The killing of 6-year-old Hind Rajab with 355 bullets after pledging for help for hours. The fatal mauling by dogs of Mohammed Bahar, who had Down syndrome. The execution of Atta Ibrahim al-Muqaid, an older deaf man in his home, later bragged about by his killer and other soldiers on social media. The premature babies left to die a slow death and decomposed in intensive care unit at Al-Nasser Hospital. The elderly man, Bashir Haji, killed en route to southern Gaza after appearing in a propaganda photograph of a safe corridor. Abu al-Ola, the handcuffed hostage shot by a sniper after being sent into Nasser Hospital with evacuation orders. A leading orthopedic surgeon, Adnan al-Bush, tortured to death like many other Palestinian captives in one part of Israel's torture network, as the NGO B'Tselem has named Israeli prisons. And despite the sheer scale of the destruction, as we speak, Israel continues to commit massacres after massacres of people crowded into gutted building, sheltering in whatever fragments of bombed out shelter remains. Truly, it is only when the dust will settle in Gaza that the full extent of the horror experienced by the Palestinians will become known. If there is any living soul left, bodily or mentally intact. As has been found in other genocides, these acts themselves are emblematic of the systematic nature of destructive intent. And this acute violence has long been metastasizing to the occupied West Bank, where clear patterns are replicating from Gaza. Since October 7, and just to mention a few elements, the rate at which Palestinians have been killed has increased 10 times compared with the previous 20-year average, including 170 children. This means that in 1 year, Israel has killed a fifth of all Palestinian children it has executed in 24 preceding years. 23. In the West Bank as well, ordinary Palestinians, academics, human rights defenders, doctors, nurses, children have been swept up arbitrarily incarcerated in a campaign of mass arrest, now facing deprivation and torture in squalid conditions without charge or trial. Thousands have been displaced in the West Bank and East Jerusalem in the largest land grab in the last 30 years. Confronted with this deliberate human-made catastrophe, the discussion regarding the possibility of Israel having committed acts of genocide remains disturbingly a contested one, particularly in the West. It is emblematic of an impunity that has obscured, muted, and sacrificed the plight of the Palestinians on the altar of political convenience for decades. But it is one none of us, not least the Palestinians, can afford to let fester any longer. This is why, in March this year, when I presented my fourth report to the Human Rights Council titled Anatomy of a Genocide, I concluded that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israel had committed at least 3 acts of genocide, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And I was not the only one denouncing it, because already by end of November 2023, 34 independent UN experts, including myself, had raised the alarm of genocide on no less than 3 occasions. By January, the International Court of Justice had identified a plausible risk of irreparable harm to Palestinian rights under the Genocide Convention and indicated measures to stop it. Alongside these, hundreds of legal experts and scholars, including genocide scholars, and 3 of the most renowned Israeli Holocaust and genocide scholars, Professor Raz Sigal, Professor Amos Goldberg, and Professor Omar Bartov, have concluded that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And still, after 14 months into this eminently avoidable tragedy, there still remained resistance to understanding this as a genocide. While there is recognition, or at least plausible genocide, while there is recognition that Israel might have committed war crimes or crimes against humanity at best, genocide remains a prohibited term, unfixable to Israel. And I insist that we must call a spade a spade. And this is a genocide that warrants being called for what it is. And not because genocide is a more serious and like at the top of the hierarchy of international crimes. It's simply a different crime than war crimes and crimes against humanity. And to misname things, as Albert Camus judged, it is to add to the misfortune of the world. Well, war crimes and crimes against humanity is what Palestinians have endured for decades under Israeli rule and occupation. Missing that this constitutes genocide leaves the totality of Israeli destructive conduct obscured and muted. The genocidal intent, namely the intent to destroy the Palestinians as such, remains camouflaged behind the distortion of international humanitarian law jargon, like human shields, evacuation orders, safe zones, collateral damage. It is also obscured behind the overly technical and reductive reasoning and, frankly, ignorant speculations regarding what genocide is. The still developing international jurisprudence of genocide is often used as an excuse not to affix the label genocide to what is happening in Gaza. And here I have to emphasize that the failure to recognize the current events in Gaza as genocide means a failure to understand the crime that is being inflicted on the Palestinians and to understand the urgent trajectory of Israeli conduct and the serious risk of erasure the Palestinians are facing in what remains of their homeland. And this serves to justify for all states their failure to take responsibility for what the Genocide Convention was enacted to do, to prevent, stop, and then punish genocide. Let me clarify. What constitutes genocide is not defined by personal opinions. It's defined in the 1948 Convention as a very specific crime involving a set of acts As I said, acts of killing, infliction of physical or mental harm, the creation of conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of a group, prevention of birth, and forcible transfer of children. So you see, not only one act implies killing, because all the other four includes the crime of genocide, imply the crimes of genocide without even crimes. So genocide shouldn't be confused with mass murder or extermination. What characterizes genocide is the intention. So one of these acts is to be committed with intent or destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And so what distinguishes genocide from other crimes is the mens rea behind the above described acts. And the targeting of the Palestinians as such, to destroy them as a group, regardless of what they've done or what they do, is proof that there is a genocidal intent. And key in providing the crime is therefore to identify the singular thread of intent that runs across the collective conduct. The belittling, denial, and invisibilization of Israel's genocidal intent is integral to sustaining the genocide itself, its impunity, and the overall colonial endeavor that Israel is pursuing. If we cannot see it, we cannot address it. This is why I insist, my dear friends, on this genocide framing. The destruction we see in Palestine is what a settler colonial genocide looks like, televised. The destruction is physical, is biological devastation of the group in order to take control of the land. And this is the critical point, because land is central to understanding the intent that drives Israel's genocide. We must step outside our Western perception or understanding of land and place or property. Because for the Palestinians, as for other indigenous people, the land is not just the place where they live, is who they are. And this creates an inherent conflict between Israel, who seeks to acquire the land that is, and the Palestinians, for whom the land is integral to their existence, to their identity, to their history. And this is what orients the settler colonial state toward the need to eliminate them. This is why the displacement, the dispossession, the cultural destruction, and the devastation of pretty much everything, for example, food sovereignty, these are war crimes and crimes against humanity on their own accord, but they are also to be seen as intended to sever the cultural belonging of the Palestinians, their connection to the land. These acts are corrosive to human and psychological spirit, as the story of many indigenous people from Australia to North America can attest today. Hence, they are genocidal. This is why, in line with the relevant jurisprudence, my report assesses Israel's intent to destroy the Palestinian people holistically through a triple lens approach that considers the totality of the conduct, all the war crimes, all the crimes against humanity, against the totality of the Palestinian people as such, in the totality of the Palestinian territory that Israel unlawfully occupies and claims being its own, Greater Israel. In fact, the brutal events of October 7 provided the impetus to advance toward the goal of Greater Israel, and plans were made taking advantage of the fog of war. The profound trauma suffered by the Israelis on that day and the rage they experienced is totally understandable. Yet, deepening and building on a deep-rooted hostility toward the Palestinians calls for annihilation grew. In a manner reminiscent of other genocides, the ensuing vengeful atmosphere prepared Israeli soldiers, often young people, to become willing executioners of the heinous destruction required of them. The totality of land I refer to in my reports, because this is my mandate, includes the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. The land that continues to be Israel and Israel's only by divine design, according to Israelis, many Israelis. Palestinians' legal and integral right being connected to that land, the totality of the Palestinian people as such, become marked as an unwanted encumbrance, the enemy, designated for cleansing, elimination, destruction. Who they are poses both an existential and legal threat to the State of Israel. This holistic approach reveals a picture of genocidal intent. It is clear that the 14 months confirm the collective dimension of the crime of genocide. The institution of the State of Israel, a self-proclaimed rule of law system, the executive, the parliament, the courts, have failed to contain or redress abusive power. Instead, altogether, they have advanced the course of the current catastrophe. And while international tribunal will continue to investigate and hopefully hold individuals accountable, the responsibility of the state must be understood and assessed in its own right, and this cannot wait. And in the face of this, instead of acting in line with international law, a minority of powerful member states, rather than halting momentum, have continued to staggeringly provide military, economic, and political support to Israel as it commits atrocities. Devastating as it has been to so many, these broader actions are revealing the scale of the struggle we all face. Without a doubt, the colonial amnesia of the West has condoned Israel's settler colonial project, is creating for Israel an exceptional status that has enabled the current catastrophe. But Palestine illuminates the inextricable link between colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. It is time for all of us to stand up and take our destiny into our hands as a global society. And we must use international law, especially in light of this year's incredible developments at the International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court, and use their pronouncements in each and every aspect of our advocacy and struggle for justice in Palestine and beyond. Those should form the basis of all our actions, strategy, advocacy, and litigation. And this is about shaping the future of humanity. We must remind the political leadership in our liberal democracies that the state is there to serve us, with minuscule letters, because we are no longer subjects of the Middle Ages beholden to their whims. They are our civil servants, not our royal family. Their foreign policy must remain grounded in principles of human rights and most especially on the principles of self-determination, the bedrock of all human rights law. We must be attuned to the way in which principles of humanity, neutrality, independence, and impartiality can become a shield for impunity. And we cannot allow ourselves to normalize the status quo of an unlawful occupation and apartheid in our bid to achieve short-term outcomes. Humanitarianism, the default option of the international community in all occasions and seasons, must be only a temporary tool to save people from life-threatening conditions and to grant them the necessary element to enjoy basic human rights. But it cannot stand in the way of people's struggle for freedom or lead them into aid dependency. We must be uncompromising in our language and in our goal if we want to make human rights a reality for all. Liberation and decolonization struggles across history have shown how the right to exist as a people and the right to resist foreign rule and domination are interconnected. What is the right to self-determination but the right to a people to live and grow as a people within a political community of its own? Voila. Genocide is the antithesis. And as I have outlined, the Palestinians stand in the way of the settler colonial desire for the land, and this is why they are being genocided. This has marked them for destruction. The antidote is there, and is the constant and uncompromising insistence on the right to self-determination for the Palestinian people. And let me tell you, this is the essence of humanity and the humanizing discourse that we might bring forward. It is what we can never lose sight of in all our work as human rights defenders for Palestine and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesca, for really quite a powerful lecture and your rallying call for action in defense of the Palestinian people. Very timely, very powerful words. I mean, you have though described really a devastating picture in your report and in your lecture. Apocalyptic is the word that you described, and it seems very apt. I want to start asking you a few questions, but I want to start with maybe first principles. Why do you think it has been that the international community has been willing to see Palestinians so dehumanized that their killing is apparently accepted without consequences? And maybe the flip side to that, why has Israel been allowed to enjoy years of impunity, decades of impunity, for its repeated breaches of international law?
Uh, Patrick, impunity has become the habit of the international community toward Israel. In general, I think that this moment has made us realize the extent to which we do not live in a world of equals, if someone had that feeling. But now we have understood the extent to which, even this is true, even at the moment, Israel is committing genocide. Even in the year Israel has killed 270 UN staff members, had destroyed 70% of the UNRWA's infrastructure in Gaza, shelled UN peacekeepers, outlawed a UN organization. Israel or declared persona non grata so many people, from me to the Secretary General, after kicking out UN agencies and not renewing the visa of UN personnel from occupied land. Occupied land. Israel shouldn't be in the occupied Palestinian territory in the first place. Why so? Because, as historian Ras Segal has brilliantly put it, Israel lives as a state of exception. Israel was conceived as a state of exception. So there is this habit. I think that there are people in good faith that they don't even know what it means to imagine that Israel, for once, complies with international law. They don't know, because Israel has never complied with international law. So, when it comes to Palestine or Palestinians. So, why is it so? I think because of bad habits, because of political convenience, because really no one wants to break, in Europe, for example, no one wants to break ties with Israel, because otherwise they will have to face Israel's big brother. And no one is ready to stand up for it. And we lack leadership. Because if we had an enlightened leadership in Europe, they would see that look, in the long term, the US is not the only form of imperialism. There are others that are there, and I'm not sure they would be better or worse than the US. But we have missed such an opportunity to build ties with the rest of the international community, with our neighbors, with the rest of the world, with the BRICS countries. And I'm not saying that it's a party of human rights compliant states, but this is the world we have inherited, also after 500 years of colonialism. And you, the Brits, know something about that. So I think that it's that political convenience, but it's also racism. Racism. Oh my God, this is the third time I'm going to quote Ras Segal in this statement. It's not, I will tell him. But again, Ras was telling me, we were having a beautiful discussion after a lecture, and he was saying, I don't know if he has written about that yet, but it's such an important concept. He said, the idea of the pure race that dominated and spread throughout the superior race during Nazi fascism didn't die with Hitler. It didn't die with Hitler. And in fact, it was not even conceived by Hitler. Again, this is the pure race, the dominant race, the superior white race is what has dominated 500 years of colonialism. It's embedded in us. So this is why I think that deep down, we remain profoundly incapable of seeing the Palestinians as human beings, many of us. I mean, we don't suffer. So if there is someone who doesn't suffer at the sight of Palestinian bodies being turned into smithereens, but they do suffer when I see Israelis or other white people, although Israelis are clearly not all, I mean, they do not fit the category of white people. It's politically, Israel is seen as part of the West. Well, that means that there is a racial bias, and we need to recognize this in our society and fight it back.
Your report reminds international governments of their obligations under international law, including the Genocide Convention. You referred in your lecture to the refusal by many Western leaders to recognize that there is a genocide proceeding and unfolding for the Palestinian people. But among the recommendations you make in your report is for a full arms embargo and for sanctions. But if we look at this from the UK perspective, despite a limited suspension, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has continued to allow arms transfers to Israel, has denied that there is a genocide, and he is a human rights lawyer. He has some experience in these matters. So what is your message to Keir Starmer and other government leaders across the world?
My message to the UK government, as well as to any other government, is to abide by international law with coherence and integrity. It's just about that. It's very simple. And I know that the UK Prime Minister knows the Genocide Convention very well, and so genocide jurisprudence, because he's been advocating before the ICJ on behalf of genocide victims. So he knows very well what genocide is, and I'm shocked to see to hear his statements. He's not alone, unfortunately. Many people, as I said in my presentation, in my lecture, denies that there is genocide, because by denying it, they are sort of reconforted. They can avoid abiding by international law, and specifically the Genocide Convention. But no, they're already at fault. They are already violating international law. Why so? Because in this year, the ICJ imposed provisional measures, and among which recognized the plausibility of a genocide. So the UK government or others cannot just dismiss that. I want to know from the UK government, what is it doing as per the jurisprudence of the International Court of Justice that I'm sure Prime Minister Starmer knows very well. This jurisprudence obliges member states to do all what they can in order to prevent and stop genocide. So, halting the 30 weapon license out of 330 is not a big effort and is not complying with international law. Because this year, the court has also reminded member states of their obligations to halt arm transfers. And the arms embargo means halting the purchase, the selling, and the transfer, direct or indirect transfer of anything that can be dually used. So in this sense, any government which doesn't comply with it is in violation of the ICJ provisional measures. But also, another critical point, Patrick, the ICJ has said that the occupation in July this year, the occupation is unlawful. It has said in all except in words that it amounts to an aggression, because it has said that it violates UN Charter and peremptory norms of international law, like the law of self-determination, and it must be dismantled totally and unconditionally as soon as possible. And the General Assembly has decided that it's as soon as possible is September 2025. It has been generous. It has given 12 months to Israel to comply, And what is the UK doing to make sure that Israel withdraws its occupation? Meanwhile, it's the UK obligation not to aid and assist in any possible way, diplomatically, politically, commercially, financially, militarily, strategically, the state that is committed on wrongful acts. It is to lead to the cessation of and to reparations because of the unlawful act. These are the UK and other member states' obligations under international law. Lack of compliance might make them, their governments, responsible for violating international law. And look, they can also be held accountable as individuals if it's found that there are international crimes being committed.
So they could find themselves being held before for future legal action for complicity, potentially for acts of genocide. I mean, that's potentially the spectre. If we follow through the logic of the International Court of Justice ruling, I mean, that's what they have to face up to, not just them, but leaders of other countries as well.
Yes, and Patrick, if I can comment on that, I mean, I keep on insisting that justice starts at home. So, while it seems that international law has failed the Palestinian, I don't think that is international law the problem. Because international law has made huge, has been significant in, particularly human rights struggles that then have been codified, have been, as I often say, strategic to bring slavery or racial segregation and apartheid or other violations of groups' rights, like the fact that women were even prevented from voting or aiming at equality. These are all struggles that have been won and then led to the codification of international law. So international law and human rights law is there to be activated and vindicated. Therefore, when I say justice starts at home, we must hold our political leaders accountable because we are not their subjects. And also we must hold accountable our fellow citizens who might have been fighting in the Israeli occupation army, including in Gaza, and they might have committed crimes. And we need to follow also the money. Businesses from our countries, businesses registered in our countries that invest in the occupied Palestinian territory, and not only companies, Patrick. I'm investigating this right now. I've received 150 submissions for my next report. It's shocking how much knowledge it's out there, and I'm fully committed to write the best report I can to show this part of the matrix, because without financial and economic underpinnings, this infrastructure will collapse. So, and this is where we need to go. We need to also to use advocacy, information, education, and strategic litigation to bring all this infrastructure back in line with international law.
I mean, while we have been very disappointed, to say the least, with our own government, we have looked to South Africa, for instance, with some admiration. Why do you think South Africa has been such a leader in holding Israel to account through the International Court of Justice, while the UK and others have rejected such approach? Is it something to do with their experience of apartheid?
Yeah, I think it's precisely because of what Western governments are lacking. The coherence and integrity I was talking about. And yes, I do believe that it also listening to the South African government statements, I think it has much to do with their commitments to justice. And Nelson Mandela's words still resonate very much with the South African people. No one is free until our struggle for liberation will not, and freedom will not be completed until Palestinians are also liberated from what? From oppression, occupation, and apartheid. I wish it had been a Western state to initiate this. Also because I think we own it. We own it to the world because of at a certain point, we'll need to come to terms with our colonial past. And making the right political choices is part of it. And I'm really, again, when it comes to the UK has such an historical responsibility because of its colonial legacy in Palestine. The fact that it continues, because making mistakes is human, persevering in making mistakes is evil. And this is why, I think that there should be, the UK present should be interrogated as much as it's the UK past, because it's appalling that in the face of all what has been done by this country, they continue to do the wrong thing, which has an impact on the same people who were punished because of European crimes 75 years ago. The Palestinians had nothing to do with European racism and anti-Semitism. And it was unfair that they had to pay the brunt of these 76 years ago and 57 years ago, and all the more now.
I want to ask a little bit more about apartheid facing the Palestinian people. How does Israel's decades-long system now of apartheid against Palestinians play a part in your charge of an ongoing genocide?
Yes and no, in the sense, apartheid is a different crime than genocide. But I think and I think apartheid. Wait a second. Apartheid and genocide are common elements of. There is something in common when it comes to settler colonialism, in the sense that if you look at settler colonial history, and if you look also at the work of Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide and whose reflection on the axis of genocide points to settler colonialism, the taking of the land, the taking of resources, the claiming sovereignty over a land that is inhabited and by others leads to a conflict, as I was saying. And in the conflict, the settler colonial power is led by this need to segregate, to reduce the space, and then to eliminate the natives, the indigenous presence. In this sense, it's genocidal in the broadest term of the term. But it also includes genocidal acts in the narrower meaning of the term, meaning its legal understanding, physical, biological destruction. And in fact, in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, many genocides of many indigenous peoples were committed, and still settler colonialism is not an instance of the past. Because in these countries, the struggle, like in New Zealand as well, the struggle of indigenous people to over the land, the little land that remains in true spirit, in true realization of self-determination continues. So we shouldn't think of settler colonialism as an instance of the past until and unless indigenous people are capable to fully enjoy the self-determination. And seriously, this is important. We need to understand not only our dealing with the past as colonial amnesia, but also the fact that self-determination as the right of a people to exist free as a people is critical for the enjoyment of all other rights. And I don't think that the human rights community has really absorbed this. Sorry. Oh God, Patrick, I forgot the question. I'm sorry. See, the link. Sorry. The link between yes. The link between apartheid and genocide. So while settler colonialism is both genocidal and it embeds, not as a crime, but the concept of apartheid, so racial domination of one group over others or over another, with the intent to dominate and entails the commission of inhumane acts, you might have cases of apartheid without settler colonialism. Like I think it is the case in, there are other cases. Let me not get there. But in Palestine, clearly you have apartheid as you had it in South Africa. But in South Africa, it has never turned into fully genocidal according to the Genocide Convention. And so why so? I don't know, but I can tell you why it's happening in Palestine: because of the land, because Israel is taking this opportunity to massively ethnically cleanse the land that remains of historical Palestine.
The International Criminal Court has recently issued arrest warrants, and there are now some wanted men. What hope do you have that these individuals will ever face justice, will ever be held accountable for their crimes?
That they are held accountable for their crimes. This is my hope. And this is all of us should work for it to happen, because it's important. It's important that it's the architects of a genocide to be held accountable. And these are two among many in Israel. But we need to start somewhere. Also, I will feel relieved when I see the ICC bringing forward charges of genocide, because until then I will have the feeling that the international system is missing the forest for the trees. They need to see the colonial erasure, because this is eventually, as the case is pending before the International Court of Justice, This is the first settler colonial genocide to be litigated before an international tribunal. So there is a lot at stake here, and they need to see the overall picture. They need to read all the existing jurisprudence for what it is. This is the holistic approach that the court in other cases has suggested. And so, but I also know that the ICC works in complementarity with other court system, with national court system. So I think that we need to use the fact that there is universal jurisdiction over crimes of genocide to bring up cases. Also for war crimes and crimes against humanity, where there is universal jurisdictions or where the crimes have been committed by a national of the country in question. For example, Italy doesn't have universal jurisdiction over war crimes and crimes against humanity, but because there are Italians living in settlements, because there are Italians who have been fighting in the Israeli army, they should be investigated, and if anything is found on them, they should be prosecuted for the acts they have committed. So there should be a scrutiny. Voila.
You've called in your report, and I see that you have renewed that call today, for the United Nations to deploy a protective presence to prevent further harm to the occupied Palestinian population. What do you have in mind? How would this work?
Look, ideally, there should be an armed presence. And it's not outlandish. This is in line with other situations in which there was a plausible genocide ongoing. And in those cases, their presence, the protective presence, like in Srebrenica or in Rwanda, the presence of the United Nations has not stopped the genocide. Why so? Because of lack of political will. So this is why we need to understand that there is a genocide. We need to understand that Israel needs to leave the occupied Palestinian territory. You know, Patrick, I'm shocked by how little importance member states are giving to this ICJ. This is not a ceiling, like someone said. The ICJ is the floor on which we walk. There was a Palestinian lawyer who used this expression, and I like it very much, because we should not be able to keep the ICJ advisory opinion, its words, its precepts, away from our discussion on Palestine from now on. It is to be the bedrock of our, as I said, of our advocacy, of our strategy, of our litigation. Because according to that, Israel has no right to have its boots on the ground in the occupied Palestinian territory. So this is what we need our government accountable for. And it's a win-win case, because it's going to, the government will not stand necessarily on its own will against Israel and its allies. It will be forced by their rule of law systems.
The current phase of this crisis for the Palestinian people has been going on for more than a year now, and you have set forth in your report and your lecture how devastating that has been. People march in Belfast and in cities right around the world every weekend and speak out for the rights of the Palestinians. They gather petitions, they lobby their politicians. And some people say to me, it's not working, and feel like frustrated with their campaigning. And I suppose I'm interested in, what are your reflections on that? And what do you say to people who are going on those protests and feeling that they're not getting anywhere? The suffering isn't stopping. There is no ceasefire. So what else maybe can people do to challenge complicity, to end the killing, and to make their voices heard and to amplify the voices of Palestinians?
I would like to answer this question, Patrick, with a reflection that is not really from me as a lawyer, but from me as a human being, because there might be many people who are pushed to say that out of despair, out of, we are grieving. We are in a stage of collective grief. So wanting not to look at it anymore is normal. Wanting to deny that this is happening is normal. Feeling enraged, feeling depressed, it's all normal. We are human. But don't be discouraged. I know that protesting is not enough. And protesting always in the same place might not work. Protests work when they are sort of unpredictable and disrupt something, the attention. Of course, I'm not encouraging anyone to commit illicit acts. No, but I'm saying we need to make a breach in people's wake up people who don't seem not to care, people who seem not to know. We need to make them empathize with both the Israelis and the Palestinians, because again, both with the Palestinians and the Israelis, because I keep on saying with different agency, with different suffering, both of them are trapped into an intertwined horror, which is a system of racial segregation and apartheid and settler colonial occupation, where clearly, I mean, how do you think these young people who have been crushing bodies from their tanks or killing kids, shooting kids in their head, how do you think they will feel when they realize what they have done? So this is why I keep on bringing forward a rehumanizing discourse. But of course, the justice is to be done. At the same time, do not feel discouraged. Change action and always remember, look at other liberation struggles. This is like the Palestinians tell us. This is a marathon. This is not a summer sprint. And we need to be equipped with a sense of hope. Yeah, hope is a discipline. I was saying we cannot give in to the temptation of feeling despair. We cannot afford that luxury because the Palestinians cannot afford that luxury either. So we need to use our privilege, and there are so many things that can be done by also joining civil society, the BDS movement, or if you are a lawyer, try to take some pro bono cases, defend the defenders who are smeared. I mean, in the UK, it seems that, hey, I'm really worried about you guys. I mean, journalists arrested under counter-terrorism bill doesn't make sense. So you need to protect your democratic foundations, whatever they are. So this is what I will start with. Don't despair. We still need all of you into this action. I mean, sometimes I feel depressed too. And then read Fanon and The Wretched of the Earth and come back to the struggle.
Thank you. Good, wise words. You touched on this in your lecture. It does seem like the space for civil society protest is shrinking, particularly when it comes to speaking up for the rights of Palestinians. You talked about how students have been sanctioned, even arrested. Academics have been silenced, sometimes forced into almost self-silencing, self-censorship. Even UN officials have been smeared. How do we best defend the right to speak out, whether it's for Palestinians today or for others tomorrow?
Yeah, my sense is speak louder, be more. You see, this is why you cannot shrink your protest. You need to defend your rights more. We need to be more, because again, it really scares me that when I'm saying the crisis in Gaza is becoming a global crisis, the example is how Western quasi-democracies are crushing the pillars of our quasi-democracies. Freedom of expression, freedom of association, the right to critique, but whenever you bring this to court, you win. This is why the beauty of still having human rights ingrained in our institutional system. So let's use it, because when we will miss it, we won't even have the comfort of being protected under the law. So I'm saying defend the defender and increase your sense of your sense of rule of law in the face of a government which tries to go away from it.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid, Francesca, that the clock has beaten us. We committed to concluding by 7, and we're going to stick to that. So I just want to thank you, Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territory, for a really quite compelling lecture and a really quite compelling call to action. Please keep speaking out. I know you will, and may your voice get stronger by the day. For those who've been joining us this evening, just to note that Francesca's full report, and there will be more to come, but her full most recent report, Genocide as Colonial Erasure, as well as her prior reports, are all available on the UN website. Amnesty International's work on human rights in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory can be found on our website, amnesty.org.uk, where we would invite you to add your name to the call of thousands and thousands already for an immediate ceasefire and for a call to stop all arms transfers fueling these atrocities. So in conclusion, I want to just thank you again, Francesca, for your powerful words this evening, and to everybody who has joined us, thank you for joining us for this Amnesty International NI lecture. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much.